History books are full of geniuses, inventors, and brilliant strategists. But let's be honest, that's only half the story. Today we're not talking about the light bulb moments. We're talking about the moments where humanity collectively and with immense confidence said, yes, this is a great idea, and were then proven spectacularly, disastrously wrong. These aren't just failures. These are the kinds of blunders that make you wonder how we ever managed to survive as a species. These are the facepalm moments of history. The decisions that didn't just miss the mark. They blew up the entire archery range. From military miscalculations to engineering epics that literally sank. Get ready for history's biggest, this was a terrible idea moments. First up, let's travel back to medieval Europe, a time of castles, knights, and apparently questionable urban planning. Imagine you're the leader of a thriving city. Your number one priority? Defense. You need walls. Big, thick, impenetrable walls to keep the bad guys out. So, you gather the best masons, you spend a fortune on stone, and you build the most magnificent fortifications anyone has ever seen. The walls are perfect. There's just one tiny problem you overlooked. What happens when an enemy army shows up and decides to just wait outside? Well, that's when you realize you built your giant, life-saving wall around your city. But you left all the farms outside. The enemy doesn't need to break down your gates. They just need to set up a picnic and wait. Slowly, the food supplies inside dwindle. The bakeries run out of flour. The markets go empty. The very walls you built to protect your people have now become the walls of a prison, trapping everyone inside to starve. The walls worked perfectly, you see. They kept the enemy out, but they also kept the food out, proving that sometimes the best defense is making sure you have enough to eat for lunch. Next, let's set sail to 17th century Sweden, where King Gustavus Adolphus decided he needed the most powerful, most intimidating, most cannon-filled warship the world had ever seen. The result was the Vasa, a ship so majestic it was practically a floating palace of destruction. It had 2 full-gun decks, packed with heavy bronze cannons. It was decorated with hundreds of ornate, gilded sculptures. It was the pride of the Swedish Navy before it even touched the water. On its maiden voyage in 1628, thousands of people lined the shores of Stockholm to watch this behemoth set sail. The Vasa glided out of the harbor, fired a salute, and caught a gentle breeze. Then, as the wind picked up just a little, the massive ship began to tilt, and then it tilted some more, and then, not even a full mile into its journey, with the crowd still watching in shock, the Vasa leaned over, water poured into its open gun ports, and it sank straight to the bottom of the harbor. It lasted a whole 20 minutes. It didn't sink in a battle. It didn't sink in a storm. It sank while just floating. The king had insisted on adding more and more heavy cannons, making the ship dangerously top-heavy. It was too big, too tall, and too ambitious for its own good. A perfect example of when more is definitely not better. Now, let's march forward to the early 19th century with one of the most famous military leaders in history, Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1812, he decided to invade Russia with his Grande Armée, a force of over 500,000 soldiers. It was one of the largest European armies ever assembled. They had a plan for the battles, a plan for the supply lines, and a plan for victory. What didn't they plan for? The weather. Napoleon's army marched into Russia wearing their standard European uniforms, great for a brisk autumn day in France, but utterly useless against what was coming. The Russian winter arrived, and it was brutal. Temperatures plummeted to unimaginable lows. The soldiers' thin coats offered no protection against the biting wind and relentless snow. Their boots froze and fell apart. Their guns and equipment failed in the extreme cold. Frostbite became a more dangerous enemy than the Russian army. They planned the invasion, but they didn't plan the temperature. The once mighty army was decimated not by cannons, but by the cold. It was a catastrophic failure, all because they essentially forgot to pack a winter jacket for one of the coldest places on Earth. Let us move on to another classic military blunder, the fortress that pointed all its cannons the wrong way. Throughout history, coastal forts were built for one very specific job, to stop enemy ships from attacking by sea. And for that, they were brilliant. They had thick stone walls facing the ocean and massive cannons ready to blast any approaching vessel out of the water. But what if the enemy just doesn't attack from the sea? This exact scenario played out multiple times, most famously with the fortress of Singapore in World War II. The British had built it up as the Gibraltar of the East, a supposedly impregnable naval base. Its enormous coastal guns were pointed south, ready to defend against any attack from the sea. The Japanese, however, didn't feel like cooperating. They simply landed their forces up the coast in Malaya and advanced on Singapore from the north, through the jungle by land. The fortress's giant guns were mostly useless. They couldn't turn around to face the real threat. It was like building the world's most secure front door and leaving the back window wide open. All the cannons faced the ocean, but none of them faced the actual problem. The enemy just walked in from behind and waved. Next, we have a strategy that has failed so many times, it's a wonder anyone ever tried it. It's the plan that relies entirely on the phrase, "Don't worry, no one will notice." Imagine you're a general. You want to launch a surprise attack. Your plan requires absolute secrecy. The only issue is that your secret involves moving thousands of soldiers, hundreds of horses, creaking supply wagons, and maybe even a fleet of ships. You're basically trying to hide an entire town on the move, yet time and time again, commanders have confidently assumed that they could march an entire army across a countryside full of villages, farms, and local gossips, and somehow remain invisible. They'd whisper their secret plans in war rooms, convinced of their own genius. Meanwhile, a farmer 100 miles away is watching 10,000 men march past his field and is thinking, that's unusual. The element of surprise was often lost before the first sword was even drawn. Spoiler alert. When you try to sneak an army somewhere, everyone notices. The alarm bells start ringing long before you arrive, all because of the beautifully flawed logic that no one would possibly spot thousands of people trying very, very loudly to be quiet. So why do these terrible ideas keep happening? It's not usually a lack of intelligence. Napoleon was a genius. The Swedish king wasn't a fool. The people who designed these forts and cities were experts. The problem often comes down to a few very human flaws. The first is overconfidence, the belief that you are too smart or too powerful to fail. Next is ignoring the experts. The engineers of the Vasa warned that the ship was unstable, but the king wanted more cannons, so he got more cannons. Then there's underestimating your opponent, or in Napoleon's case, underestimating Mother Nature. And finally, there's the simple refusal to admit a mistake. Instead of pausing and rethinking, leaders often double down on a bad idea, hoping it will somehow magically work out. You see, the biggest disasters in history often didn't come from a lack of smarts. They came from way too much confidence and not enough common sense. The most dangerous phrase isn't "I don't know," it's "I know exactly what I'm doing." And that's the thing about history. Sometimes the biggest disasters start as brilliant ideas. History is full of moments like this, small decisions that ended up changing everything. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing for more fascinating stories from the past, and let me know in the comments which moment surprised you the most. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.